Good morning, Grace Point Church. God bless you all. You know, I'm so glad that we are here together this morning with each other, and the presence of God is here. I want to give a round of applause again to all the star dads that are with us this morning. We acknowledge you, your hard work, who you are. You know, I was saying earlier, we don't have any deadbeat dads in our church. We have some pretty amazing star dads. And later on, we're giving out something else to an amazing dad as well. So get ready for that. I welcome each and every one of you to Grace Point Church. This is our third week of this series, Rooted. And this week, I've been thinking a lot about the word surrender. Right? We saw from the video, right? Giving our throne or our place or our decisions to the Lord. And it involves the word surrender. There seems to be little room in our world, in our social psyche, for even the idea of the word surrender. Surrender means to admit defeat, to give up, to acknowledge our weakness. And in my American history courses in school, I remember reading a lot of moments of military surrender, right? And what's interesting is that in all the stories, it's others surrendering to us as Americans, right? The Germans surrendering to the Allied forces to end World War I. Or how about, we have an image here of Hirohito. This is after World War II, where Pearl Harbor, they were on the deck of the USS Missouri. This was a big deal. They were surrendering on the very same place that the war started. And so we as people don't like surrendering because it admits defeat. In fact, we have so many slogans which are all great, right? Don't give up, keep on going. You never surrender, and we will put up a fight until our very last breath as a sign of our strength and our capability. Even in games, right? And here in New England, we're famous for that. Basketball and baseball and football, right? New England Patriots or just Boston in general, we're known for our grit and our comeback ability. Never surrender. And it's a great American tradition to be people who don't surrender. Are you following me? But today, we come to discover that there is a kind of surrender that is actually very significant. And it's a kind of surrender that actually leads to life. It's essential to cultivate it. It's a deep, rich, rooted life with God, which means a life of surrender. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning here in our week 3 of our Rooted series. How many have been reading the Rooted challenges in the morning or throughout your day? You've been getting the emails? I hope so. If you haven't, please let me know and we can sign you up for that. And I hope it's been going well for you. I hope that you haven't given up, right? And that you're continuing this Rooted challenge. I've enjoyed getting emails and texts about how God has spoken to you and about how God is opening up your eyes and how much more you are connected with God. I love it. Please continue to send me texts and emails because God is speaking to all of us, right? And it's great to share these stories with each other. So we are all in this together, are we not? Yes, we are. So there's a certain flow to the things that we've been talking about, that we've been covering in the last few weeks. Week 1 was about the mind, about our mind, discovering right ways of thinking about who God is and who we are. And then week 2 was about our heart, right? Helping us to understand that Christianity isn't so much a religion, but it is a relationship with a God who loves us and nurturing a devotional life, right? Reading through these things that we get every morning or throughout the day isn't so much about fulfilling a duty or checking off a box as it is about spending time with a God who loves us like a friend, who waits for us to come and to meet with him. So it's not about a religion, but a relationship. It's about our heart. And this week, we're going to talk about our will. Coming to that deep place of being willing to offer up our very selves to God. And we'll dig into that a bit this morning. We're going to turn to the book of Mark, chapter 8, verses 31 to 35. And if you have your Bibles, you can open it up there. Otherwise, we're going to read. Just follow along with me. So in this passage, Jesus is teaching the crowds, and he's teaching his disciples, his followers, to stand alongside and listen to him. And his teaching seems to take a turn. And we find Peter, one of his disciples, doesn't seem to like what Jesus is saying. So let's read it together. Jesus began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul?" Now, what set Peter off was that Jesus was starting to indicate that he was making his way to die, and that he was actually going to make his way to the cross and offer up his life, his very life. And Peter didn't like that very much, right? He didn't like that idea, the idea of losing in defeat and suffering in such a way. And it was something that Peter couldn't stomach. He couldn't fathom it. He couldn't grasp it. He was not going quietly into that night with Jesus. He came away from that little pep talk that Jesus was giving with a fire in his belly, right? He was ready to grab Jesus and look him in the eye and convince him that he was way off track, that there had to be another plan. Don't you just love Peter? I mean, he's just so passionate and fiery. It's our natural inclination, the way we usually are. We take a problem and we take the resources of our lives and we start trying to fix the problem, and we dump resources and we call so-and-so and we figure this out, and we're driving our car. Let me get there first, and trying to fix the situation and to stop a negative outcome. We can do this, we say. We can fight this. We can figure this out. We can go after this. And this was Peter's natural inclination. And can I say, in much of our lives, God does give us resources. He gives us abilities. He gives us opportunities, confidence to tackle a problem, to find solutions, to work our way to a better place. He puts in us this will to live and to fight, this drive to accomplish and desire to succeed. Like, that's a natural part of who we are as people created by God. But at this moment, Jesus isn't rebuking Peter's natural inclination to fix a problem. At this moment, Jesus is asking the question, the ultimate question of life. He's asking Peter, who is in control of your life? Who is it that holds the key to the outcome, Peter? Peter, who is it that calls the shots? Who is it that determines whose purposes your life is being lived for? Peter, who is it? Who's in control? Jesus knew that it was his own purpose to follow the will of the Father. And he understood that God had called him to this earth for this very moment, and he had to fulfill the Father's plan. He had to follow God's will. He knew that it meant that he was to lay down his life, to take upon himself the brokenness of this world and the sin of all humanity, and in the greatest act of all times, to offer himself as a living sacrifice for all the world. Jesus knew this. So when Peter starts to rebuke Jesus, Jesus does it right back, right? He rebukes Peter. And what does he do? He calls him the devil. I mean, like, that's like the ultimate rebuke, right? I don't know about you, but anytime I've called someone the devil, like, it's serious business, right? It's really not a good thing, right? Our kids sometimes, right? The guy cutting us off when we're driving, the lady at the DMV, right? I mean, we just call these people devil, right? So Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." Now, I don't know if Jesus was reminded of the time when Satan, the devil, tried to tempt Jesus 3 times in the desert by offering him a different path to glory than the path that he was supposed to follow. A less costly way than the way to obedience and surrender. And so with Satan, it seems, with the devil, it seems there's always a better way to get what you want. And then to have to turn to God and ask him what he would have you do. With the devil, there's always a shortcut. There's always a way that you can do it just without God. There's always a way for you to get there. Just don't ask God about it. The enemy of our soul, Satan, he always wants us to fight the urge to do the thing that God wants us to do. The devil doesn't want us to do God's will. And so Jesus was teaching Peter that the true way of life, the way of surrender, everybody say surrender. The way of surrender to the will and purpose of God is always the best choice. So number 1, I want to talk about 3 ways that we can surrender and find this true way of life. Number 1, to surrender isn't so much about giving up as it is to give over. You see, you don't just surrender when you find yourself backed into the corner and you have no other options, when you've been outgunned to the point of obvious and you just have to stop and relent. No, it doesn't mean that you have to stop and give up. Surrendering is about approaching God with an open hand, giving him what is ours and trusting that he knows what is best with what to do with it. Taking what he needs to take and putting back what he needs to put back. So to surrender isn't about giving up. It's about giving over. Every once in a while, when it's time to transition, it's time for bedtime. My 6-year-old Justin, I find him going up the stairs sometimes, and he sort of makes his way up to his bedroom, and maybe he's like a little slow. A lot of the kids are, right? They don't like to go to bed. And I'm like, why haven't you moved along? Why aren't you in your PJs? Why haven't you brushed your teeth yet? And once in a while, I look down and I'll see his little fists, and maybe he's like hiding something behind his hands. And his knuckles are just like a little bit white because he's squeezing hard. And I know it's something in his hands that's holding him up. Something that is distracting him. Something that just he wants to pay attention to at that moment rather than doing what he's supposed to do. And most of the time it's change. My son likes loose change, right? So he likes coins, right? Just so you know, when he was little, he was playing with pennies. The kids were sleeping in the room together. They like to have these sleepovers in their rooms. And he was playing with pennies, and then he decided to put them in his mouth, right? He thought that would be a good idea. I don't know how, maybe to see how they tasted. I don't know. Sure enough, he swallowed them, okay? And that was a trip to the ER. Yeah, he had his x-rays, and yes, I have the x-ray picture with 3 little pennies in his body. And you can only imagine how we had to make sure that they got out of his body. I'll let you think about that a little bit. Now, when he was younger, I used to just take the coins out of his hands, right? It was easy because I was older, and I'm mom, right? I'm stronger. And his little fists, right? They weren't as strong. But now, I don't just pull it out of his hand. It's much better to say to him, open your hands and give me the coins. And just stand and wait until he's persuaded, which sometimes takes a little bit longer, right? I might have to give him the look, right? But he's persuaded to just hand the coins over to me. But 2 things have happened. Number 1, the coins are out of his hand. And number 2, he has learned that moment of surrendering his will to me, his mom. Maybe not so willingly, but willingly enough to open up his hands and to help me to move things along to keep bedtime going. You see, to follow Jesus is to live open-handedly before God. It's to give over to him our entire lives and to trust him that he knows best with what is to be done with it. And Peter, his inclination was to close his fist, to hold on tight. We got to fight. God, you can't die. What do you mean? There's a better way. There's a better way. I have dreams. We have plans. We have a future. And let me tell you, we can do it together, Jesus. I mean, he had left everything. And he had banked on Jesus to this life and significance that he'd hoped to accomplish. And here he felt like if Jesus dies, it's going to slip away. And there are moments like that when we feel like opening our hands might mean giving it all up. But Jesus is reassuring him that this is the best way to live, open-handedly. Our natural inclination is to tighten our grip when life gets hard. Our natural inclination is to hold on and figure it out and keep it close to you. In fact, don't even share with anybody what's going on because you are strong and you can do it. And God says, no. You know, surrender is about opening your hands, not giving up, but giving it over to God. And number 2, to surrender is to open ourselves up to better things. Mark chapter 8, verse 35, where we read, it says, "For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will" what? Will save it. So here's the deal. I don't know how you live. I don't know how white your knuckles are, but about being close-fisted. And maybe you're used to living close-fisted. And it fuels a self-centered lifestyle because you know what a closed fist says. You know what that says. It says, these things in my hand are mine. They are mine. They belong to me. They are mine to do as I please. And our culture, the culture that we live in, it fuels this idea, the pride of ownership and possession. Don't let anybody in between those knuckles. But we all know a life lived to serve ourselves at the end of the day eventually becomes nothing more than a prison that we find ourselves trapped in. Trapped in our petty wants that drive us, in our things, the things that inhibit us to be the people that we want, the people that we are meant to be, that we've been created for. We know that life like this doesn't lead to our beauty and goodness. A life that is close-fisted, it leads to harm and detriment. You see, the consumer within us starts to contend with our very soul. The consumer that says, this is mine. This is mine. It belongs to me. And Jesus says, what good is it for us to gain the whole world and lose our soul? Jesus counters. He opposes. He's different with our inclination to hold on by inviting us to lose our lives, to surrender for the sake of himself and the sake of the gospel. Now, I can hear the skeptic in us saying, well, this is nice. This is nothing more than a power play made by Jesus. You know, of course, wouldn't it be nice if we asked people in our lives to lighten their holds in this world so they could follow us? Well, that's cool. It's a legitimate question. Jesus did seem pretty set on this, that those who would follow him would surrender to him and to his authority. But if you think that Jesus did it out of ego or pride or for attention or for position, then you are missing the whole point of what Jesus came to do. Because Jesus didn't come to make a name for himself. He didn't want to start an organization that he was at the head of, right? He didn't clamor for large crowds. He didn't say, follow me. Let's see if we can get 50,000 up in here. No, the crowds followed him. He was a natural leader. Jesus was who he was. He was at the head, but that was his position. But he didn't come to do that. He came as a servant to give his life for us. Jesus came into this world to liberate the world from the bondage that it had been held in, of suffering, of sin and disease and sickness. And yes, the bondage that comes even from our own selfishness that holds on to what we want. And so he's calling us today to release our hold in our lives, into this world, and to learn what it means to gain through letting go. To experience the kind of life, the kind of kingdom that he's ready to establish when we release our hold. Lose your life for the sake of Christ and for the gospel. That's what the verse says. And this surrendered life is putting to death the things that we hold dear, of letting things die in our life. Maybe that sin that needs to die so that life can spring from us. And it's the deep secret of the beautiful life with God in this world. Now, if we can learn to live by getting ourselves out of the way, we can learn to live the life that God has for us. And it is a life of surrender, and it is a beautiful surrender. So surrendering is not to give up, but it's to give over. And it's not about it's not about closing ourselves up. It's about opening ourselves to better things. And finally, number 3, surrendering is a process. You say that with me today? Surrendering is a process. It's a process. But that process begins with a very bold, a very courageous first step. And it's a step of full surrender. This is where it starts. It starts by opening up your life and giving over everything that you have to God. It's about letting go of the pride, and like the lady in the video, about putting God first. Even when we think that we can handle it, or we can do it better, or maybe we can collaborate with Jesus. And God says, no, just let me do it. Surrender. Surrender. Give it over. I have a better process. I have a better way. I'm going to show you the way. Now it's what Jesus calls us to do, to give it all. And to my kingdom, and give it to me, and give it to the gospel. It sounds like too much to ask of any human being. It seems like it's an outrageous request. But then it's not any more than what God already did by giving us his son Jesus, the ultimate surrender of himself. And as we've learned, there is no one better. If you think about it, there is no one better to manage our lives in this world than the one who created us out of love. The one who loves us dearly, the one who knows us better than we even know ourselves. So it's important for us to offer ourselves fully to God. Surrendering ourselves in small increments is actually a horrible way to live. Well, I'll give this inkling of an ounce or this small thing. It's like someone asking you for some chips or something, and when you're eating a bag of chips and you break off a chip and give them a little piece, right? Like, it's not worth it, right? It's almost not worth it. Forget it, the full chip or nothing, So until we've surrendered it all, we don't realize that those other little things really are just that. They are little things in life that we need to let go of. In the book Mere Christianity, if you've ever read this book, it's a really good book. If you haven't read it, it's by C.S. Lewis. I highly recommend it. I think it's online now for free. You can download the PDF. And this is what he says in his book, Mere Christianity. He says, Christ says, give me all. I don't want so much of your time and so much of your money and so much of your work. I want you. I've not come to torment your natural self, but to kill it. No half measures are any good. I don't want to cut off a branch here and a branch there. I want to have the whole tree down. I don't want to drill the tooth or crown it or stop it, but to have it out. Hand over the whole natural self. All the desires which you think are innocent, as well as the ones you think are wicked, the whole outfit. I will give you a new self instead. In fact, I will give you myself. My will shall become yours. Now, I like what he says here. It's kind of like the idea of a transplanted tree that we were talking about a couple weeks ago. One that is pulled out of its dead soil and nutrient poor area of self and our natural inclination to hold on and keep things close. But God is saying, I'm going to uproot you. I'm going to transplant you to this new place, this nutrient-rich, life-giving soil of Christ Jesus. You got to say, I am all in, Lord. Let's do this, and let's do it your way. The surrendered life is really to give back to Jesus the life that he's given to us, and in return, receive the life that he offers to us. And once the big work of surrendering to Jesus is done, then the pruning that comes after, that's part of the process of life. If you've given your life to Christ, your whole life, if you've made that willing decision, you've given your will to Christ to gain your life by surrendering, it's then that you'll have started to see the fruit of that life. The love, the joy, the peace, the patience, the kindness, the fruit of the Spirit, the self-control. It all comes along as part of the process, because surrendering is a process. So the question I have for you today is this: what are you having a hard time letting go of? What is making your knuckles white these days? And I have to believe for every one of us, simply asking the question brings something to mind. I'm going to give you an opportunity in just a moment to ask that very question. And can I ask every single one of us to look down at our hands and ask ourselves, what is in there that I am not letting go of? And remember, we always gain in Christ when we let go. Abraham surrendered in the Bible the security of his family, and he gained the promised land. Esther surrendered the simple life of obscurity that she was living, and she gained the courage from God to become the queen and rescuer of her people. Moses surrendered his position of royalty and the staff of the prince, and he gained the staff of God and freed his people from slavery. David surrendered his pride when it came to the point of admitting his guilt and sin. And he opened himself up before God. And in return, he found and he gained forgiveness and a clean and pure heart. Mary, she surrendered her reputation in her community and her standing as a woman and became the mother of the Lord Jesus. The woman at the well, she surrendered her sin and her shame, and in return, she gained a new vision of herself as loved and forgiven and valuable. Paul surrendered the sword and discovered a power greater than that of bullying and political power, and he surrendered to the love of God and found it to be beautiful and gracious and more precious than anything throughout his ministry. Peter, our famous Peter, he surrendered his boat. He surrendered his livelihood. He surrendered his career and his business. And he surrendered his pride and his security. And he found a greater and deeper purpose in his life than he could have ever imagined. And of course, Jesus. Jesus surrendered the sweetness of perfect community with God the Father, the safety and protection and comfort of being in heaven. And ultimately, he surrendered his very life, and he found the joy of the resurrected life, the life that now he offers to all of us as a gift to be received. And the question today is, what are you holding onto tight-fistedly? Is there something that the Spirit of God is urging you or is nudging you today to give over to Him? And what if you chose not to give it to God? What if your decision is to not let go? What could you be losing out in your life by holding on to this? Some of us have learned that it's better to perform and achieve than it is to admit to or talk about anything difficult. Jesus says, my way is a way of surrender. And when you surrender, you gain, because it is a beautiful surrender. And God says, take off the mask. You don't need to pretend like you have it all together anymore. God says, when you surrender, you will gain all that you need. And so again, I ask you, what is it that's making your knuckles white these days? What is it that you are holding on to? Maybe it's a dream for your life that has become an idol, that has inhibited your ability to move forward. Maybe it's a sin that you have excused yourself of, and you've said it's okay, but it's not getting in the way, but you know deep down that it is. Maybe it's anger, maybe it's laziness, maybe it's envy, maybe it's lust, maybe it's worry, maybe it's indifference. Something you need to lay down and open up to God. Maybe it's something else. So right now, I'm going to ask the worship team to come up. We want to create a little bit of space, some time for us to respond to God this morning. And we're all going to stand to our feet, and the team is going to just sing out to the Lord, and I'm going to come up in just a moment and close in prayer. But I just want to ask you to just close your eyes for a moment and bow your heads and ask yourself, what is it that I'm holding on to this moment? What is it that I've been holding on to so close-fistedly? And God, I feel your Spirit urging and nudging me to let it go. You see, obedience is ours. That's our job. The outcome belongs to